I'm Mike Vardy.
Meal planning is important because it prevents us from being a disappointed wreck when dinner time comes around and we have no clue what to make, or even if we have the ingredients to make the meal. It's a time and a money saver, but most importantly, it frees up valuable brain space. Creating a meal plan prepares us for the week to come and gives us peace of mind that we're organized and can feed ourselves and our family. That's why I do it, and that's why Plan to Eat helps me do it. Your subscription includes access to the Plan to Eat website and fully featured mobile apps on iOS and Android. And Plan to Eat gives you the tools to clip and organize recipes from any website, the ones your family loves and that fit your dietary preferences and needs. And you can create a meal plan around your schedule. Then what happens is the Plan to Eat software automatically creates an organized shopping list based on your plan. So sign up for your free trial at plantoeat.com/timecrafting. That's plantoeat.com/timecrafting. The coupon will be automatically applied to your account and can be used when you're ready to subscribe. It's valid for new customers only. Give Plan to Eat a try today.
And this is the Productivityist podcast. Hey there, and welcome to the show. On this episode, I speak with Justin Shelby. He's the founder of Artichoke, and we dive into what exactly Artichoke is in this episode. We also talk about the productivity pitfalls of starting a new venture and how he has learned to avoid some of them. We also, not all, notice not all, because sometimes they rear their ugly head, and he talks about that as well. Talks about awareness. We talk about simplicity. We focus a lot on simplicity in this episode. Automation, and then we dive a little bit into the realm of AI, which is, something that I don't really talk about all that much with guests, but with Justin, it was more than appropriate, and you'll hear why just in a few minutes, actually. Why don't we just skip the few minutes and get right to a few seconds? Here's my conversation with Justin Shelby on the Productivityist podcast. I'd like to welcome Justin Shelby to the Productivityist podcast. Justin, thanks for joining me today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So we got you. You're on the road. You're just traveling as we were getting ready for this interview, and so I'm glad we were able to connect because you're a busy guy. You've founded 3 previous businesses. The one that you're kind of focusing on right now, we'll kind of start off with this. Is called Artichoke. For people who aren't familiar with Artichoke, can you maybe just tell people a little bit about it and maybe the reason why you started it? I think that there's obviously, if you're starting several businesses, this must have been an itch that you needed to scratch.
Yeah, well, the elevator pitch for what Artichoke is all about is it's an all-in-one business platform for solopreneurs and micro teams to efficiently run their business. With the understanding that for a lot of solopreneurs and micro teams, the passion is the service they offer, not so much the running of the business, so to speak, and that often can get in the way of progress and success. But the backstory on it really goes back to an unrelated business that we were in. Kind of stumbled into the boutique urban fitness club business, and at the time, industry software had not caught up to the notion that facilities had multiple revenue streams outside of membership. So I teamed up with a developer at a company that my wife worked in at the time, and we built a cloud-based solution to manage this in-house need with no aspiration to do anything beyond that. And it worked great. And in fact, years down the road, we were still using it and starting to transition off of it onto the industry software that had finally caught up. And we're kind of scratching our heads, noticing that the workforce was changing pretty dramatically, partly enabled by technology and especially mobile technologies, but also just attitudes towards work were changing, kind of a generational effect. People were no longer thinking about that 30-plus year career in one place, and they were starting to be more creative about how they approached work. So what we understood from all that was that there was really a pretty big void in the market for easy to use business utility solution to run your business. So anyway, that's the backstory, the kind of the passion part of how it got launched. It was a in-house solution that transitioned later into a bigger opportunity.
And what along the way? Like what lessons have you learned along the way, having started a bunch of businesses? Because it can be a real pursuit, but sometimes it can be less than productive along the way when you're going through the growing pains of a business. So, I mean, I have a lot of audience members who are freelancers or starting their own business or have their own side hustles. Like, what were some of the growing pains that you came across? And maybe how have you, I mean, along the way, and then maybe when you were, getting into the latest venture with Artichoke, that you were able to refer back to those, go, okay, I know how to deal with that pain point and how to kind of keep myself clear from that this time around, or at least being able to mitigate it to a certain point of view.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I would say that a couple things come to mind quickly as you're asking me the question. One is the fine balancing act between establishing focus so that you can channel your resources, which in the early stages are usually limited. And let's face it, even for big companies, resources allocated to divisions or projects or initiatives are limited by design, right? So no matter what your context is, you need to focus, and to focus narrowly enough to accomplish something meaningful with what you have, and then build from there. So I think the challenge when you're in the early stages is chasing the most shiny object you happen to see that day, and thinking, oh, well, that's what we should have done. Now, the complete inverse of that notion is that you have to stay aware, because the first path that you picked is very unlikely to be the final path to success. So you have to continue gathering data along the way and just not reacting to it too quickly. And yet even that can be flawed, because if you're reacting to customer feedback, and sometimes if you don't react to that quickly enough, it's a death sentence. So it's really this balancing act between listening without overreacting, establishing a narrow enough focus, and then rallying the team around that focus until you have enough information to say, well, we need to shift that 20%. So to me, those are the big ones.
How important is simplification, or even just going with a form of minimalism? Because that's the real, buzzword nowadays is minimalism. But let's talk about simplification. How important is that, not just in the terms of you running your business now, but also in your life? Like how much of a role does that play?
Well, I mean, I'm a big believer in simplicity across the board, as you just described it. I don't claim to have succeeded in achieving what I would believe to be the optimal amount of simplicity across the board, but it's constantly on my mind. And so I think that plays a huge role in long-term success in your life, and certainly with your professional world. As it relates to new ventures, whatever the industry or category may be, simplicity is a critical success factor, especially in the early stages, because it enables you to leave room for things that might seem pretty straightforward and simple when you start them, but then there's 40% more to it than you thought once you get in, and then you have that bandwidth to consume that additional 40% and do it well. Whereas if everything you assume out of the gates is you've got it fully figured out and scoped, and there's a 5% margin of error, well, what do you do when that 40% hit? So I think simplicity in focus is mandatory. I think without that, the chances of success are reduced dramatically.
And when you're working with groups, I would imagine it's even more crucial and critical for simplicity to take hold, because there's more objectivity behind it. Whereas when you're working with groups, there's a lot of subjectivity, because you've got different people, different opinions, different strengths, weaknesses, et cetera. So having simplicity play a massive role in there would be critical too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the more complexity you build into interactions and strategies, and certainly on the human level, the interactions between people, I think the less likely you are to keep a team focused and motivated.
Now let's talk about automation a bit, because I think that, in my research, you are a fan of automation. I know that there's automation involved with the product that you're with Artichoke now, but I want to talk about the dichotomy that can happen between simplicity and automation. I mean, one of the things that I love doing is when it comes to automating, I often automate by having, frameworks and triggers in place mentally. So that way I'm doing more of a human automation than, say, relying on technology to do it. But I do understand and even have some, technology that is helping me automate along the way. How do you strike, harmony between, simplicity and automation? Because there can be the danger of too much automation, which can affect simplicity, or not enough automation, which makes things complicated or even convoluted.
Yeah, I mean, I think the balance is unique to the situation, and in business, unique to the industry and the size of the business. So, for example, I think it might be tough to find too many people that would argue against the idea of how much more powerful human-to-human interaction is for something, say, like product support. And so if your business allows for that, right, which is an expensive endeavor, then it would probably be the best path. But the fact is, most businesses can only afford a certain level of that, realistically within their business model. So there's some element of automation that's driven by necessity, right? You still need to provide that excellent service, but a portion of that needs to be automated. And then there's a point, as you mentioned, where you've gone too far, and the customer feels as if there's absolutely no human on the other end. Mm-hmm. And why would I do business with that company? And we've seen companies, let the pendulum swing too far that direction. So it really does depend on your industry and your company's size and resources. But the interesting thing I think that's happening now, and it's affecting all industries, all facets of business, but certainly on the customer success side, is the introduction of true artificial intelligence tools that, coupled with real human interaction, can be spectacular. For example, someone writes a message in and says, "Hey, I'm having trouble with XYZ product feature," and they immediately get back, suggestions for tutorial videos and other clients that have asked the same question, a couple instant resources they can browse, but they still hear back from an actual support person, within, let's say, an hour. So in that case, it's like this hybrid between artificial intelligence, automation, and human interaction.
Let's talk a bit about the idea of artificial intelligence. We're seeing a lot of tools, like Timeful would be a good example. We'll talk about the calendar here for a second. Google bought Timeful, and Timeful was its own thing, and they basically, what it would do is learn when, like, you'd say, I want to do these things, and it would look at your schedule, and based on, a bunch of factors that it had, built into its algorithm, it would decide, hey, you would be best to exercise during this time, or you'd be best to do this at this time. And it was automatically slotting things. We talked about the idea of AI. How, and we may have already dove into this a little bit, but where do you draw the line when it comes to that kind of, handing over the keys to that degree, right? Do you know what I mean? Like when it comes to Gmail filters or filtering email and saying, okay, well, I trust that this tool or this piece of technology is going to take care of this, and it's not the margin of error is so low. Like where have you gone and then said, oh, I need to take a few steps back here? And where have you gone and it worked wonderfully, and you're like, why didn't I try this sooner?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I would say that in a product organization where so much of the golden nuggets of opportunity come straight from the mouths of customers or off the fingertips of customers typing, a message, that you really can lose an opportunity to significantly continue the improvement of your product, and also miss that golden, big idea that comes along only through a series of unexpected interactions. Because I think it's pretty rare for an organization to sit in an enclosed cell and only talk to themselves and come up with all the greatest ideas. That just doesn't happen. In fact, that's probably where the worst ideas come from.
Right.
But everyone convinces themselves that they're the best because there's no outside stimulus. So I think from a product innovation, big idea perspective, you can't. I think it's really dangerous to kind of leave all of that interaction out, even if you're technically serving the customer, flawlessly. So I think that there's an element where that's gone too far. Now, to give you a more concrete example, so if we overstepped our bounds on the automation side, I'll give a simple example. So we have a notification engine in our product. And without getting into the details of it, it's intended to provide lots of productivity enhancements for the user who recognizes there's only 24 hours in a day and they know to do a lot of things. But the fact is, if they aren't earning money unless they're in front of the client, how could they also do appointment reminders and payments and happy anniversary, all the stuff that makes for good client relationships? And so what we found was there was a line in the sand beyond which it was just kind of too much, too many choices to make for the user and the system, too much, canned stuff going out, to the clients. But the stuff that was more functional and helpful, that stuff was good. The stuff that wasn't pretending to be too personal when really it wasn't.
Right.
That stuff is where kind of you draw the line. And so we're constantly working on finding that line because it changes, partly because I think the general appetite for efficiency from technology is increasing as we get more comfortable and familiar with the devices and how all this stuff works. Whereas initially, no one wanted to really get anything but another person on the other end of the phone. So I think the bar, the line in the sand is moving. And so we constantly have to kind of reevaluate that as we go.
So we've talked a lot about digital tools to this point, and that's been the focus, but I'd be curious to know personally, are you purely a digital person, or do you find that grabbing a good old fashioned notebook and other analog tools are also, ways that help you? I mean, you founded, three previous businesses, you've launched, you are a doer. So is all of that, like, what role do the analog tools play, if any, when you're doing stuff, as well as, again, when do the digital tools come into the picture?
It's kind of an ebb and flow for me personally. I'll tell you that I've kind of gone through several cycles of the basic tools that I use, and then I'll migrate off of a set and onto a new set. And by the way, they're not all digital. So, I'll migrate from a purely digital period into a period where I'm using the little Moleskine book, writing stuff down in a tiny little book and revisiting it later, and then back to digital. And usually the back to digital is driven by a new platform that's introduced in the market that just seems to catch my eye. And, lately the thing in the last couple of years for many people, and myself included, has been, the introduction of Slack, which is just in my opinion, a phenomenal tool that solves the big email problem. And so, tools like that, come and they stick around for a while because they work so well. In other cases, not so much, things that start off solving one or two problems, but then don't really scale beyond that, end up punting and going back to some form of, manual management or looking for another tool. So I would say that I've gone through cycles on this, and I think that actually is a healthy process to go through, even though it can be a little bit disruptive to continually change these tool sets, because it kind of reopens your eyes to other possibilities, and I think over time it makes you better.
Let's actually talk about seasonal work. Do you find that there's some stuff that you do differently, like in terms of not just, again, with your group, with the company you're working with now, but do you find that there's certain seasons of productivity that you have where it's like, okay, this is the time of year where I generally find I'm better at working on these things than others, or is it kind of, like you said, more of an ebb and flow and it's not really terribly structured?
Well, if your question is there a predictable seasonality, year over year? that, of course, is largely dependent on industry.
Sure.
But in the case of what we're working on now, I would say there is some seasonality component to it that is recurring, but there's definitely like an ebb and flow to the team dynamic as it relates to productivity, because you go through periods of business development or product development where you're defining the targets, identifying the targets, contacting the targets, or defining the engineering needs and fleshing them out, and then moving into execution phase, which, like we said before, no matter how well you plan, tends to be different than what you expected to some degree.
Right.
And then all the other things kind of have to slow down. So then the pendulum's swinging into the execution zone, and then into measurement, and then you're back into concept, And so, yeah, there's definitely very identifiable periods of ebb and flow throughout the year. And sometimes they're in 2 to 4 week cycles. Sometimes they're in 2 to 3 month cycles.
And before we wrap up, I just want to talk about the idea of what in Artichoke that you've got right now was the kind of the minimum viable product. Like, what was the core of, like, okay, this is what we want to have here? Because I know your goal is just to make things simpler, better, for small groups. And that's my understanding based on what I've seen. But what was the minimum viable that you want to make sure people got out of it? And then what have you been building on top of it slowly but surely so that it can become, maybe, for lack of a term, more robust or more maybe complete in terms of what you're thinking of as the quote finished product, end quote?
So the MVP, the minimum viable product stuff, was really, the combination of payments, scheduling, and client data in one place, and those three things together, which often for this user exist in 3 different places, gives you the ability to do some workflow automations that really eliminate a lot of steps that are prone to lots of error in accounting than other things. So, although we're not an accounting platform. So those were kind of the MVP components. The things that and when we got to that point, we noticed a completely different transformation of prospects finding us and how they would engage with us. So the things we've been building on after that have been a combination of things. One, we created the ability for the product to interact or to integrate with over 700 other products through a third-party integration hub, which gave us the ability to learn more about what people wanted, what they said they wanted versus what they actually use.
Right.
We built a multi-user function to the product that expanded it from just solopreneur to micro teams. And we are now working on some pretty big partnerships that are not in the works. They're actually done deals, but they're in development that will expand the earning modality, as we refer to it, to then expand our vertical focus. But in this case, we're doing it through very well-known partners that are experts in those areas. So this ecosystem of meaningful partnerships that have been well constructed to be very easy for the user is kind of the next phase of big stuff that we're doing.
As we finish off this discussion, I'm looking at a blog post on one of the early ones at Get Artichoke, and this is from 2013. So I want kind of give you a sense of how long it's been, and we're now into the later part of 2017. Let's talk about the idea of you can't do it all no matter what you think. Because I think a lot of people, and I talk about this in my work, where you feel like there's so many things that you want to do. And David Allen's got that famous quote, you can do anything, but you can't do everything. How has this, looking back 4 years, and you probably are thinking about the post right now, but you may not even remember what you wrote, but it's going to be in the show notes. How has that helped you? Like that reminder that you can't do it all no matter what you think, along this journey as you've built Artichoke, and even outside of the business world?
Yeah, so I'll answer the first part inside the context of our business. it's part of what we think about every day. Because if you think about it, we're saying, hey, we're the all-in-one business platform, but we had to define what all-in-one meant, because you can't do everything. And so the all-in-one for us is understanding from a user's perspective those core foundational elements they need that are big pain points for them, and that if you can kind of simplify all in one fell swoop, that it completely transforms their work life. But the notion that the other things, defining those other things that we are not going to do, is liberating, right? So we've been really clear now about some of the things that we will not directly solve, but we will make it easy for the user to find those things and for them to interact with us. On the personal side, same thing, really. It's really trying to constantly simplify and eliminate noise in life that's not adding any intrinsic value to your family or your marriage or your friendships. And that's a process that's easier to say than to do, especially when you're self-employed, because self-employment, although the Hollywood version of it is like, you're the boss and all this, it's how it is. It's a never-ending stream of new challenges and stress management and all that stuff. So I think in the context of self-employment, the simplicity thing is, and you can't do it all, is really about it. It's a daily routine of saying, all right, let's take an inventory here. And then there's kind of the quarterly inventory you take to say, big picture, what do we have going on here? Do some of these things need to go? Do they need to stop? Do they need to transition? And so it would be great if it was like a once a year thing where you just like lay it all out and go, okay, done, keep. But it's certainly more complicated than that. But I think if you just refuse to do that and accept that it is an ongoing process, you won't end up in a place where you want to be. So I think on the personal side, it's pretty similar to business. It's a discipline of asking those questions over and over again and taking a few minutes to breathe and lay it all out and start moving things in a certain direction based on your wants, needs, and desires.
Justin, this has been a great conversation. Where can people find you and learn more about Artichoke now that they've listened to this episode and want to dive in deeper? Yes.
Well, thanks for asking, and thanks for having me on the show. I certainly enjoyed talking to you. They can find more about the company at getartichoke.com, just like it sounds. You can visit the blog, which is linked right off that main page. And if anyone wants to get in touch with me, they can reach me at justin@getartichoke.com.
Justin, thanks for joining me today on the Productivityist podcast.
Thanks so much. It was a great time.
Big thanks to Justin Shelby for joining me this week on the show. You can read all of the links that we put in the show notes. There's not a lot this week, but that blog post that he mentions is definitely in it that I kind of refer to. You can check out Artichoke, of course, at getartichoke.com. And I had a great time chatting with him. Of course, I have bonus material with him that's available to members only. Go to productivityist.com/membership to learn more about that, because there's a lot more in there than just bonus episodes of the podcast. There's a whole lot more. So I had a great time today. Thanks to John Polster for producing the show. Thanks to Justin for joining me. And thanks to you for joining me. And until next time, I am Mike Vardy, the host of the Productivityist podcast and founder of Productivityist, reminding you to stop guessing and start going.